Everyone thought it was just another letter in the mailbox. But the moment I tore it open, I knew my life was about to change forever. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if the words printed on it carried a weight meant to crush me. They thought they could fence me in, lock me out, and strip me of my freedom. They didn't know who they were dealing with. My name, Ethan Morgan. I'm 38, a business consultant by trade, but a rancher by heart. 2 years ago, I bought 30 acres just outside Austin, Texas, chasing a dream of peace and self-sufficiency. The land was rough when I found it: overgrown weeds, a sagging barn, a farmhouse that leaned like it was tired of standing. But I saw what others didn't. I saw a home, a sanctuary, and maybe a future I could build with my own 2 hands. And build I did. With every sunrise, I was out there fixing, planting, creating. I rigged an automated irrigation system that read the soil and the weather better than most farmers I knew. My chicken coop ran on solar power and knew the sun's schedule better than I did. I even built a system that texted me when my goats were about to give birth. My little ranch wasn't just land. It was proof that hard work and a stubborn streak could turn anything around. Life was quiet, steady, and good. My closest neighbors, Frank and Alina Hamilton, often stopped by. Frank, a retired engineer, loved tinkering with my gadgets. Alina brought over blueberry pies that still made my mouth water just thinking about them. I'd sell eggs, fresh vegetables, and sometimes rent out space for small family gatherings. Nothing fancy, just the kind of life where the sunrise mattered more than the stock market. Then the letter came. The envelope was stiff, official. Inside was a notice about a homeowners association meeting. Now I wasn't even part of the HOA. The Golden Meadows Association was half a mile from my land, but their letter mentioned illegal road usage issues and new security enhancements. And that's when my stomach dropped. The road. The one road that connected my ranch to the world. See, that road had existed for over 50 years, and I had a recorded easement that gave me permanent rights to use it. Permanent. It didn't matter who owned the surrounding land. That road was my lifeline. But the vague, carefully chosen words in that letter told me someone wanted to test just how strong that lifeline was. So I went to the meeting. That night, rain hammered the roof of the Golden Meadows Community Center. My muddy pickup looked like an alien among the polished SUVs lined up outside. When I walked in, boots dripping onto their spotless tile, heads turned. I could feel the disapproval like heat on my skin, but I didn't care. I had a right to be there. At the front stood a man I'd never seen before, tall, sharp suit, salt and pepper hair styled like he belonged in a political campaign poster. He smiled the kind of smile that didn't touch the eyes. His name was Maxwell Bennett, the new HOA president. He introduced himself with pride, bragging about his real estate successes in Dallas. Beside him stood Patricia Lawson, the HOA manager, scowling like I'd already ruined her night. Maxwell talked about community matters, landscaping, the pool, the annual barbecue. But then, with a casual shift of tone, he said it. The ranch road situation. My road, my lifeline. He clicked a button, and the projector flashed images of a grand, secure gate, stone columns, landscaped gardens, electronic keypads. Residents murmured their approval as he spoke about safety, property values, prestige. Then his words cut like barbed wire. The unsightly ranch traffic must be addressed. Unsightly ranch. He was talking about me, about the families who came for eggs, about the neighbors who trusted me with their kids' camping trips. He reduced it all to a problem, an inconvenience standing in the way of his million-dollar homes. And then he said construction would begin tomorrow. I felt my chair scrape back, the sound echoing across the room. Every eye turned as I stood. My voice shook with anger but came out steady. Excuse me, I'm Ethan Morgan. That unsightly ranch you're talking about, it's mine, and I have a legal easement on that road. You can't block it. Not now, not ever. For a split second, silence. Then Maxwell's smile turned cold. He looked at me like a teacher indulging a stubborn child. Mr. Morgan, times change. The board has already approved the project. You'll have access, of course, for a modest annual fee of $3,000. Gasps rippled through the room. I clenched my fists, heat rising in my face. You can't charge me for what's legally mine, I shot back, but Maxwell just leaned on his podium, smile never wavering. The construction starts tomorrow, he said. I suggest you get your access card before the gate closes." That night I drove home through the rain, headlights slicing through the storm. But I couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at me. This wasn't about security. This wasn't about property values. This was about power. Maxwell had a plan, and I was standing in his way. What I didn't know then was that this fence wasn't the end of the fight. It was only the beginning. The sound woke me before the sun did. That sharp, piercing beep, beep, beep of heavy machinery backing up. At first I thought it was a dream. But then the vibrations hit, the rattling in the walls, the faint tremor in the ground. I pulled on my boots, heart racing, and stepped out onto the porch. And there it was. An 8-foot wall of steel and arrogance being drilled into the earth, right across my only road. Bright yellow excavators clawed at the dirt, workers pouring concrete like they were sealing a tomb. And in a way, they were my tomb, the tomb of my freedom. I sprinted down the drive, mud splattering up my jeans. "Hey!" I shouted, waving my arms. The crew barely looked at me. One man, sweat dripping from under his hard hat, muttered, "Orders from the HOA, sir. Nothing we can do." His eyes wouldn't even meet mine. "Orders." Within the hour, the shiny black SUV rolled up. Out stepped Maxwell, dressed like he was headed to a boardroom, not a construction site. Patricia trailed behind him, her tablet clutched like a weapon. Maxwell smiled, holding up a paper he wouldn't let me touch. "Building permit," he announced smugly. "All perfectly legal." Then, as if he were tossing me scraps, he pulled out a small plastic card. "Temporary access. Expires in 7 days. After that, you'll need to pay $3,000 for an annual pass. Consider it community dues." The rage that burned through me at that moment was something I'll never forget. My hands curled into fists so tight my knuckles ached. "This is illegal," I growled. "I have an easement, you know it. You can't block my road." Maxwell tilted his head, the kind of gesture a man makes when he thinks he's already won. "Then sue me," he said quietly. "See how long that takes." He turned his back and climbed into his SUV, leaving Patricia to thrust the plastic card into my hand like it disgusted her to even touch me. "7 days," she said flatly. Then she walked off, heels clicking against the gravel. I stood there, card in hand, staring at the massive gate rising between me and the world. I had never felt so humiliated, so powerless. To swipe a card just to leave my own land, it was like being a prisoner. That's when I made a decision. I drove straight to the county registry office. The clerk, an older woman with glasses dangling from a chain, took one look at my papers and shook her head. "This easement is ironclad. Been on record since 1972. Whoever's telling you otherwise is bluffing." She stamped and certified a fresh copy, sliding it across the counter to me like she was handing me a weapon. And in a way, she was. Next stop, Olivia. Olivia Nguyen had been a friend since college, sharp as a blade, a real estate attorney with a reputation for dismantling HOA tricks. She read through my papers, adjusted her glasses, and looked me dead in the eye. "They don't have a case, Ethan. But here's the truth. They're not playing by the law. They're playing by time. Injunctions, hearings, appeals, weeks, maybe months. They're counting on bleeding you dry before you ever see a courtroom." Her words cut deep. I had the law, they had money, and money has a way of bending time. Still, Olivia laid out a plan. Document everything, record every conversation, keep a journal, take photos. And if they trap you in, call the sheriff. That's imprisonment. They'll regret it. I drove back that evening, the certified easement folded in my pocket. The fence was nearly finished, stretching across the horizon like some kind of modern fortress. Floodlights cast harsh shadows across the road, making the metal gleam. And there, at the center of it all, stood the gate, my humiliation carved in steel. When I swiped the temporary card to enter, the beep and mechanical groan of the gate felt like shackles locking around my wrists. I sat in the truck for a long time, staring at that gate in my rear-view mirror. Maxwell thought he had me caged, but he didn't know what was coming. Because as I walked the property line that night, surveying every inch, something caught my eye. The fence curved, just slightly, not much but enough that it didn't sit right. I pulled out the old survey map I kept, comparing landmarks, counting steps, and that's when it hit me. Part of their precious gate was on my land. 3 feet of cold, hard steel, Trespassing. I felt a slow grin spread across my face. Maxwell wanted a game of power? Fine, but this time I wasn't just going to fight him in court. No, I was going to beat him on his own terms, with steel, with sweat, and with a little bit of Texas rancher ingenuity. I didn't know it yet, but that misplaced fence post was about to flip the entire war. Sometimes the smallest cracks can bring down the biggest walls. 3 feet, that's all it was. 3 feet of their shiny new gate trespassing on my side of the property line. To Maxwell, it probably looked like nothing, a surveyor's oversight, a sliver of dirt. But to me, it was the weapon I needed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by papers, maps, and Texas property law statutes printed from the county's website. My coffee went cold hours before I even noticed. Every time my eyes drifted toward the window, I saw that metal barrier looming in the distance like a giant middle finger aimed straight at me. By dawn, I had the answer. The law didn't just protect my easement, it protected my land. And that 3-foot encroachment meant the HOA had built an unauthorized structure on my property, which meant I could control it. But control wasn't enough. Maxwell wanted to squeeze me with his gate, to turn my freedom into a fee. What if I turned the tables? What if his precious gate became my tool instead of my prison? That's when the idea hit me. If they wanted to make the road a toll road, then I'd build a toll booth, on my land. And every Golden Meadows resident would have to pay me before they even touched Maxwell's fancy security gate. The thought made me laugh for the first time in days. I called my buddy Ryan Cooper, a local contractor who'd helped me rebuild the barn the year before. Ryan was a no-nonsense type, the kind of man who didn't trust anyone in a suit. When I told him the plan, he let out a sharp whistle. A toll booth? Damn, Ethan, that's crazy, but it might just be crazy enough to work. We spent the rest of the day gathering supplies. Lumber from the yard, steel reinforcement, electronics from the surplus shop, and a pile of solar panels I'd been saving for another project. I sketched designs on the back of receipts and napkins, refining them into something real. Ryan brought in 2 trusted workers, and I called an old college buddy who specialized in electrical systems. We didn't wait, we couldn't. That weekend, under the cover of night and the glare of floodlights, we built. The sound of drills and hammers echoed across the quiet Texas fields, interrupted now and then by a passing car slowing to watch. The booth started as a skeleton of wood and steel, but by sunrise it had walls, a roof, and a reinforced barrier arm. By the second night, it had cameras, an automated payment terminal, and solar panels humming quietly on top. It looked professional, almost too professional. I wanted it that way. If the HOA wanted to play City Hall with me, I'd look like City Hall. Sunday morning, I screwed in the final sign. Large, clear letters. Private toll road, $20 per crossing, $100 monthly pass. By noon, the first cars rolled up. Confusion painted every face. A minivan slowed to a stop, the driver rolling down the window with hesitation. A woman leaned out. "Excuse me, what is this?" I smiled, calm, polite. "Ma'am, this portion of the road is on my property. Since the HOA decided to make access subject to payment, I'm simply doing the same. $20 per crossing or $100 for the month. I take cash, card, or mobile pay." Her jaw dropped, but after a long pause, she sighed and pulled out her credit card. The barrier lifted with a mechanical groan, and she drove through. One by one, car after car, residents paid. Some argued, some laughed, some cursed me under their breath. But most handed over their money. They needed to get home, and I was the gatekeeper now. By mid-afternoon, the neighborhood was buzzing. Kids filmed the toll booth on their phones, neighbors snapped photos, and videos began circulating online. People couldn't believe it. A rancher outsmarting an HOA with his own private toll road. Then Patricia showed up. She came back from grocery shopping, her car loaded with bags. When she saw the booth, her face twisted into shock, then fury. She rolled down her window, voice sharp as broken glass. "What is the meaning of this? This is illegal. I'm calling Maxwell right now." I kept my voice calm, even friendly. "You don't have to pay, Patricia. You can always park outside and walk home." I gestured to the property survey taped to the booth wall. Everything's legal. This road crosses my land. I'm just charging the same way you are." She sputtered, slammed her window shut, and parked her car in the ditch. Half an hour later, Maxwell arrived. I'll never forget the look on his face. Eyes wide, lips trembling with rage, his polished shoes sinking into the dust as he stormed toward me. "What the hell do you think you're doing? This is harassment. You can't block a public road." I leaned casually against the booth, hands in my pockets. "Public road? No, Maxwell, you told me yourself it's private. HOA property, and this section." I tapped the survey. "This section's mine, so I'm just playing by your rules." His jaw tightened. "I'll call the police." "Please do," I said, smiling. And he did. He dialed, packing like a caged animal, barking into the phone about illegal tolls and harassment. 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. Officer Ramirez stepped out, a man I'd met before when reporting trespassers. He listened to both of us, then calmly examined my papers. When he was done, he turned to Maxwell. "Sir, this is a civil matter. According to these surveys, Mr. Morgan is on his property. If you dispute it, you'll need to take it up in court." Maxwell's face went crimson. He stammered, sputtered, then finally shouted, "This isn't over," before storming back to his SUV. But as he slammed his door and peeled out of the lot, I couldn't help but smile. Because for the first time since this war began, Maxwell wasn't the one holding the cards. I was. What I didn't know was just how far he was willing to go next, and how dangerous his desperation would become. They thought tearing me down would be easy. They didn't realize every nail they tried to pull only made me hammer harder. Within days, my toll booth wasn't just working, it was thriving. Every resident of Golden Meadows had to pay twice, once to Maxwell for his gate and once to me for mine. The irony was delicious. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly, counting each payment receipt like a small victory against the giant who wanted to crush me. But peace never lasts long when money and pride are on the line. It started with a letter, thick, expensive stationery embossed with the name of a downtown law firm. William Davis, a real estate attorney with a reputation for being ruthless. The words inside dripped with intimidation: cease and desist, unlawful business operation, nuisance laws, violations. A dozen accusations designed not to hold up in court, but to scare me into folding. I didn't fold. I handed the letter straight to Olivia. She flipped through it with a wry smile. "Intimidation," she said simply, tossing it aside. "Half these claims don't even make sense. They're throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping something sticks." Still, I could feel the pressure mounting. Maxwell was upping the stakes, testing just how much I could take before breaking. And when legal tricks didn't work, he tried something uglier. The first sabotage came at midnight. My cameras caught the moment, 3 figures in hoodies creeping up to the booth. One carried spray paint, another lugged a crowbar. And the third? Even under the grainy light, I recognized Maxwell's stiff posture, his expensive shoes out of place in the dirt. They smashed at the payment terminal, slashed wiring, sprayed black paint across the cameras. They thought they were clever. They thought they'd destroyed my evidence. But they didn't know me. I'd built redundancies, hidden backup cameras tucked into fence posts and tree branches, all streaming to the cloud. As Maxwell smeared black paint across one lens, another caught his face perfectly lit, his features twisted in anger. The footage uploaded instantly to my storage and to Olivia's inbox. The next morning, I stood at the booth with a brand new sign. Special toll for Maxwell Bennett, $1,000 per crossing. When the video hit social media later that day, the county lit up with laughter. Residents shared it in group chats. Local Facebook pages exploded with comments. Even the Austin Chronicle ran a headline, "HOA President Caught Vandalizing Toll Booth." And just like that, Maxwell's carefully groomed image began to crack. But cracks don't always mean collapse. Sometimes they mean desperation. The HOA board scrambled to do damage control. Frank told me later that Maxwell called an emergency meeting, pounding his fist on the table, declaring me a menace. "He's humiliating us," Maxwell snarled, "dragging this community's reputation through the mud. We need to shut him down." Not everyone agreed. Residents were tired of paying 2 tolls, tired of Maxwell's arrogance, tired of watching their fees disappear into legal fights. Nancy Fletcher, a woman who had lived in Golden Meadows for 2 decades, stood up during the meeting and demanded answers. Why are we spending HOA funds on lawyers and fights when we could just remove the gate? Why are we paying for your battles, Maxwell? Whispers of dissent grew louder. I wasn't their enemy anymore. Maxwell was. But he wasn't done yet. That week, county inspectors showed up on my land. Clipboards in hand, they searched for code violations, loopholes, anything to declare my toll booth illegal. Ryan had built it to the letter of the law, every screw and panel compliant with county regulations. They left frustrated. Next, the HOA tried to cut my power, but my booth ran on solar panels with battery backups. The lights glowed all night, a beacon of resistance. Then came the threats, anonymous letters shoved under my gate, crude messages spray-painted on my fence. At first, they rattled me. But after the 3rd or 4th, I started collecting them in a binder, another piece of evidence in the growing case against the HOA's corruption. It wasn't just about me anymore. People from other neighborhoods reached out, families who had faced similar battles with their own HOAs. Strangers stopped by the booth not to pay, but to shake my hand, to say thank you for standing up. Some took selfies with the toll booth like it was a tourist attraction. I realized I wasn't just fighting for my ranch. I was fighting for every little guy who'd ever been pushed around by someone with money and power. And the more support I gained, the more reckless Maxwell became. One night, as I sat on the porch sipping coffee, headlights cut through the dark. A car idled near the toll booth longer than usual. Too long. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle, walking down toward the road. The car peeled away just as I arrived, but not before I caught a glimpse of the license plate. Maxwell. The next morning, I found nails scattered across the gravel in front of the booth. Dozens of them, waiting to puncture tires. If he thought intimidation would work, he hadn't learned a thing. I swept up the nails, held them in my palm, and whispered to the empty road, "You picked the wrong rancher, Maxwell." Because every dirty trick he pulled only gave me more evidence. And I knew one day, one way or another, those tricks would bury him. But I also knew something else. Maxwell wasn't just fighting me over a road. He wanted my land. He wanted it bad, and soon I'd find out exactly how far he was willing to go to take it. Every war has a moment where you realize the battle isn't just about you anymore. That moment hit me the night Frank Hamilton came to my porch, hat in hand, eyes heavy with worry. He leaned against the railing, glancing around as if the mesquite trees themselves might be listening. "Ethan," he said in a low voice, "you need to know something. Maxwell's not just doing this for spite. He's got investors, big ones. They're counting on him to clear you out." The words landed like a punch. Investors. Suddenly it all made sense. The arrogance, the relentless pressure, the way Maxwell acted like he could bulldoze me without consequence. He wasn't just trying to make life miserable. He was playing a bigger game. My ranch wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a gold mine standing in the way of his empire. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my desk, laptop glowing in the dark, digging through public records, property filings, anything with Maxwell's name on it. Hours slipped by, the sound of crickets outside my window replaced by the occasional thrum of passing trucks. And then I found it. Platinum Ridge Developments, a slick real estate firm out of Dallas. Buried in their project filings was a proposal for Golden Meadows Estates, a multi-million-dollar development of luxury homes, private clubhouses, tennis courts, all hinging on one thing, my land. They needed my road, they needed my ranch gone, and Maxwell wasn't just helping them, he was profiting from it. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, anger rising like a storm. This wasn't about community. This wasn't about property values. It was about greed, pure, ruthless greed. The next morning, I met Olivia at her office, slamming the printed documents down on her desk. She skimmed them quickly, her eyebrows arching. Well, she said, almost admiring the audacity. "Looks like your friend Maxwell has a little conflict of interest, and by little I mean illegal." She leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her chin. "We'll need more. Proof of payments, emails, contracts, something undeniable. Right now, it's circumstantial." Proof that was the key. Over the next week, I turned into a detective. I called old contacts in real estate circles, reached out to contractors who'd crossed paths with Platinum Ridge, even met with a county clerk who owed me a favor after I helped him set up solar panels at his cabin. Piece by piece, the picture became clearer. Maxwell wasn't just skimming a little off the top. He was neck-deep in shady deals, falsified permits, and promises to investors he couldn't keep unless he drove me off my land. One night, while going through a stack of forwarded emails, a friendly neighbor had slipped me. I found it. The smoking gun. An email from Maxwell to one of his investors. Once Morgan realizes he can't access his property, he'll have no choice but to sell. The temporary inconvenience to residents will be worth it when property values increase by 30%. I stared at that sentence for a long time, the words burning themselves into my brain. He wasn't even hiding it. He thought he'd already won. But he hadn't counted on me. When I showed Olivia, she smiled for the first time in weeks. "This," she said, tapping the email, "is what buries him. But let's not move too fast. Sometimes you have to let a man dig his own grave before you hand him the shovel." And dig he did. The following week, Maxwell strutted into Olivia's office for what he called a peace negotiation. He brought William Davis, his high-priced lawyer, both of them dressed in suits that probably cost more than my entire month's income from the ranch. I laid out my offer plain and simple: remove the gate, restore my easement, and the fight. No more toll booth. No more lawyers, no more war. Maxwell laughed, actually laughed. "Mr. Morgan, you don't understand your position. We can bleed you dry in court for years. You'll be bankrupt long before we feel any pain. You're a gnat trying to fight a hurricane." But arrogance makes people sloppy. He couldn't resist bragging. He talked about his development plans, about how the board always voted his way without even reading the documents, about how soon Platinum Ridge would have their deal sealed. He even chuckled as he said, "The only question is whether you'll profit by selling now or be ruined fighting later." What he didn't know was that Olivia's office had a recording system. Texas law only requires one party's consent for recording. And we had more than consent. We had a clear notice sign on the wall that Maxwell never even looked at. Every arrogant word he spoke was captured in crystal clarity. That night, as I drove home under the Texas stars, the weight on my chest lifted for the first time in months. I had the footage of his vandalism. I had the emails. And now I had a recording of him admitting to everything. The only question was when to drop the hammer. For now, I waited. I rebuilt the booth stronger than before, reinforced with steel and alarms, solar-powered and backed by batteries that no sabotage could kill. Residents kept paying, though their patience with Maxwell was thinning by the day. At church gatherings, at grocery stores, even in the school pickup line, people muttered about him. The tide was turning. But I knew Maxwell. He wouldn't go quietly. He'd strike harder, dirtier, more desperate than before, and when he did, I'd be ready. Because sometimes, the best way to win a war isn't to fight every battle. It's to let your enemy destroy himself, and to be there when he finally falls. The truth doesn't whisper forever. Sometimes it explodes like thunder. I held the evidence in my hands, emails, recordings, documents that showed Maxwell wasn't just power-hungry, he was corrupt. I had enough to crush him, but Olivia warned me to time it right. "Ethan," she said, her eyes sharp, "don't swing until the whole town is watching. When the spotlight's on him, he can't hide in the shadows anymore." So I waited. The toll booth kept running, stronger than ever. Every day, cars lined up, residents sighing as they handed me $20 or bought monthly passes. At first, they were angry at me. But anger fades when you're forced to face the truth. It wasn't me charging them twice, it was Maxwell. And slowly, they turned their fury on him. The first cracks showed at the next HOA meeting. Frank told me later that the room was boiling over. Nancy Fletcher, the longtime resident, stood up and demanded, "Why are we paying 2 tolls, Maxwell? Why are you draining our HOA funds to fight Ethan when you're the one who started this mess?" Murmurs rippled through the room. Maxwell brushed it off, claiming I was a menace, a troublemaker. But people weren't buying it anymore. Too many had seen my booth, spoken with me, heard my side of the story. And then came the article. Zoe Sullivan from the Austin Chronicle had been following my battle for weeks. She came to the ranch, sat at my kitchen table, listened as I laid out everything: the easement, the fence, the toll booth, and Maxwell's harassment. She took photos of the booth, copied the documents, even read through the threatening letters the HOA's lawyer had sent. When her piece ran, it wasn't just news, it was fire. The toll road war, how an HOA tried to fence out a rancher and sparked a revolt. Within hours, it spread across social media. People in towns I'd never heard of were sharing it, adding their own HOA horror stories in the comments. Local TV stations showed up with cameras, their vans parked outside my ranch. Reporters asked me to tell the story live, and I did. Calm, steady, direct. "I didn't pick this fight," I told the camera. "But I'm not backing down. A man's home is his freedom, and I'll fight anyone who tries to take that away." The clip went viral. Maxwell must have felt the ground shaking under his feet, but instead of retreating, he doubled down. Pride does that to men who mistake arrogance for power. He called another HOA meeting, stormed in with William Davis at his side, and declared, "This community will not be humiliated by a rogue rancher." That same night, he made his worst mistake yet. My cameras caught him again, this time with Davis and another man in the dead of night, vandalizing my booth. They smashed the new terminal, spray-painted over the signs, tried to cut through the barrier arm with a hacksaw. But my system had grown smarter. Motion sensors triggered alarms, backup cameras caught every angle, and cloud storage uploaded the footage instantly. The next morning, while Ryan and I reinforced the booth yet again, I uploaded the video to social media with one simple caption: "Caught in the act. HOA President Maxwell Bennett, his attorney, and an unidentified accomplice. Proof below." The footage spread like wildfire. Residents gasped. Neighbors cursed. Strangers across the state shook their heads in disbelief. By noon, news anchors were replaying the video, pausing on Maxwell's face frozen mid-spray paint, arrogance plastered across his features. That's when I knew the tide had turned. But I wasn't done. I gathered every piece of evidence. The emails proving his deal with Platinum Ridge, the falsified permit showing the gate built illegally across my line, and the recording from Olivia's office where Maxwell bragged about manipulating the board and ruining me. Then I dropped it, all of it. I posted the full package online, sent copies to every HOA member, and handed the files to Zoe Sullivan. By the next morning, her new exposé ran with the headline: "Documents reveal HOA president's secret deal with developers, caught on tape admitting to plan against local rancher." The community exploded. Residents packed into the next HOA meeting, shouting over one another. Maxwell tried to call the evidence fake, claimed I had doctored the footage, but his voice shook. Patricia sat beside him, her face pale, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The room wasn't buying it. They'd seen too much. Nancy Fletcher stood again, her voice shaking with fury. "You lied to us, Maxwell. You put all of us at risk for your deal. You vandalized property like a thug. You dragged this community into a scandal, and now the whole county is laughing at us." Cheers erupted. Demands filled the air: resignation, accountability, removal. Maxwell's carefully built image was gone. He looked small, cornered, like a man who'd finally realized the storm wasn't passing. It was here to stay. For me, it was more than victory. It was vindication. The humiliation I'd felt that first day at the gate, the nights I'd lain awake wondering how I'd keep my land, the fury of watching strangers control my freedom, it all flipped in that moment. The power wasn't his anymore. It was mine. But even as I stood taller, I knew it wasn't over. Men like Maxwell don't surrender quietly. And I could see it in his eyes that night. The fire of a man desperate enough to burn everything down just to avoid losing. The question wasn't whether he'd strike again. It was how. Desperation makes a man dangerous, and Maxwell Bennett was desperate. The day after Zoe's exposé hit the presses, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd finally back down. His face was plastered across the news, the emails and recordings undeniable, the vandalism video impossible to refute. The community had turned on him. Investors were fleeing Platinum Ridge like rats from a sinking ship. It seemed like checkmate. But I underestimated the pride of a man who had built his whole life on control. That morning, a courier arrived at my ranch, sweating in the Texas sun as he shoved an envelope into my hands. Inside was a lawsuit, Maxwell suing me for defamation. He claimed the evidence I'd released was falsified, that I had ruined his reputation with malicious intent. I laughed when I read it, though the anger simmered beneath. Olivia didn't laugh. She scanned the papers carefully, her jaw tightening. "He's flailing, Ethan. He knows he's cornered, but flailing men can still land blows. We'll fight it. This won't stand." So we prepared. Evidence organized, timelines mapped, witnesses lined up. Olivia was a fighter, and she wasn't about to let Maxwell's desperation drown us. Meanwhile, the community boiled over. At the next HOA meeting, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a blade. Residents shouted questions Maxwell couldn't answer. Why had he lied about the easement? Why had he concealed his ties to Platinum Ridge? Why had he vandalized private property like a criminal? Patricia Lawson, once his loyal lieutenant, sat pale and silent. When pressed, she admitted she didn't know the full extent of Maxwell's dealings. Her words rang hollow. People saw her for what she was, a willing accomplice. Nancy Fletcher didn't hold back. She slammed her hand on the table, her voice trembling with rage. "We trusted you, Maxwell. We trusted you to lead this community, and all you did was sell us out for your own pocket. You've cost us money, trust, and dignity. Enough is enough." Applause thundered through the room. Residents rose to their feet, chanting for his removal. Maxwell tried to shout over them, tried to wave his arms like a man commanding soldiers. But his voice cracked, his words drowned in the chorus of his downfall. In that moment, he wasn't a leader. He was a man stripped bare, cornered by the very people he once controlled. Within a week, the HOA board voted him out, effective immediately. Patricia resigned quietly, slipping away before the storm consumed her too. Nancy Fletcher was appointed interim president, her first act being to call me personally. "Ethan," she said softly, "I want to make this right. The gate coming down, your easement will be honored, and will cover your legal costs. I can't undo the damage Maxwell caused, but we can start over." Her words lifted a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. For the first time in months, I felt air in my lungs that didn't taste of smoke and fire. But Maxwell wasn't finished yet. Even stripped of his title, he clung to the fight like a drowning man clutching driftwood. He pushed his defamation suit forward, showed up in court with Davis at his side, sneering across the aisle like he still held the upper hand. The hearing was quick, too quick for him. Olivia laid out the evidence with surgical precision, the emails, the video footage, the recording of his own words. The judge leaned back, unimpressed by Maxwell's bluster. When the gavel finally struck, the ruling was clear. His case was dismissed. He'd lost again. But humiliation wasn't done with him. The vandalism charges stuck. The county sheriff filed misdemeanors for property damage and trespassing. To avoid jail time, Maxwell accepted a plea deal, community service, restitution payments, and a criminal record that would follow him for the rest of his life. I drove past him one afternoon, weeks later, as he picked up trash along the highway in an orange vest, sweat dripping down his face. The man who once strutted in polished shoes and tailored suits now bent under the weight of a garbage bag. I almost pitied him. Almost. Back at Golden Meadows, the gate was gone. Crews tore it down piece by piece, the screech of metal echoing like the last cry of Maxwell's empire. In its place, wildflowers were planted, benches set where neighbors could sit and talk. The road was open again, just as it had always been meant to be. The toll booth still stood, earning me a steady stream of money in the final weeks before the settlement. But with the fight over, I dismantled it, donating the $15,000 I'd collected to a new land rights defense fund. A fund to help others who found themselves bullied by HOAs that thought power could erase justice. At the victory barbecue I hosted on my ranch, neighbors filled the yard, laughing, eating, finally free of Maxwell's shadow. Frank and Alina brought pies. Kids chased goats. The sound of country music floated in the air. I raised a glass and told them the truth. This land was never meant to be a battlefield. It's meant to be shared, not by force, not by greed, but by community. Cheers erupted. For the first time, my ranch wasn't just mine, it belonged to all of us. But as the night wore on and the stars glimmered overhead, I found myself staring at the old spot where the gate once stood. The battle was over, yes. Maxwell was ruined, yes, but the scars remained. And somewhere out there, I knew he was still plotting, still bitter, still trying to claw his way back into relevance. Men like him don't fade quietly. They burn out screaming. The only question was how, and when his fire would finally die. Some battles end with a bang, others fade into silence. Mine ended with both. Months after the last piece of Maxwell's gate was hauled away, Golden Meadows didn't look like a battlefield anymore. The wildflowers planted where the gate once stood had taken root, their bright petals swaying gently in the Texas breeze. Kids sat on benches where cameras and card readers used to loom, their laughter rising higher than the chirping cicadas. The road was free again. My road, our road. Maxwell, though, he wasn't free. He tried one last desperate move, filing an appeal to overturn the dismissal of his defamation suit. The judge barely glanced at the paperwork before striking it down. Then came the restitution checks, the hours of community service, the whispers in town whenever his name was mentioned. The man who once strutted with power now crossed streets with his head low, avoiding the eyes of neighbors who used to nod respectfully. Eventually, he sold his home, packed up what was left of his pride and drove out of Golden Meadows in the dead of night. No farewell, no dignity, just silence. Some said he moved to Houston. Others claimed he fled the state entirely. I didn't care, he was gone. But his shadow had left marks. The HOA, under Nancy Fletcher's leadership, began reforming itself. Transparency was enforced. Board members were required to disclose conflicts of interest. Residents were given more say in decisions. For the first time in years, trust began to return. George Miller joined the board, promising to make sure no Maxwell Bennett ever runs this place again. As for me, I tore down the toll booth, not in anger, not in defeat, in closure. The barrier arm became part of a children's playground. The solar panels powered an educational display about renewable energy. Even the cameras, once my shield against sabotage, now pointed toward the woods, capturing wildlife for local schools to study. What was once a weapon became a gift. With the settlement money and the toll booth earnings, I created the Land Rights Defense Fund. People from across the state reached out. Families bullied by HOAs, farmers threatened by developers, small landowners drowning under legal fees. For them, I wanted to be what Olivia had been for me. Proof that you don't have to bow to power just because it's dressed in a suit. But my ranch became something more, too. Frank and Alina were the first to suggest it. "Ethan," Frank said one morning over coffee, "you've built something here not just for yourself, but for all of us. Why not open it wider, make it a place where kids can learn, where neighbors can gather?" So I did. We turned my fields into a community garden. Alina taught gardening workshops, her hands in the soil beside teenagers who'd never planted a seed before. Frank set up a makeshift lab in my barn, teaching kids to wire simple circuits, to understand the power of building with your own hands. On weekends, families came for farmers' markets, DIY workshops, and picnics under the old oak trees. Schools sent buses of children to see the goats, learn about solar irrigation, and walk through the fields. My land, once at the center of a war, became a hub of connection. And it grew. The University Agricultural Extension partnered with me to run small research projects. Local artisans set up stalls during events. Even neighbors who once looked at me with suspicion now knocked on my door asking to help. The same road Maxwell tried to claim for his empire now brought people together in ways he could never imagine. Sometimes at dusk, I'd stand at the edge of the property where the toll booth once stood. I'd watch the sunset bleed orange and red across the sky, the wildflowers glowing in the fading light, and I'd remember the nights of fear, of anger, of humiliation. The beep of the gate locking me in. The smirk on Maxwell's face when he thought he'd beaten me. The despair of thinking I might lose everything. And then I'd look at the laughter of children in the distance. The voices of neighbors carrying on the wind, the hum of life stronger than before, and I'd understand something deeper. The fight was never just about a road. It was about dignity, about community, about proving that sometimes the smallest man with the fewest resources can stand against the tallest walls of greed and win. Maxwell thought money was power, but power isn't in bank accounts. It's in people. It's in the farmer who refuses to sell out. It's in the neighbor who dares to ask questions. It's in the community that chooses to rise instead of bow. 1 year after it all ended, Zoe Sullivan returned for a follow-up article. She asked me, "Ethan, what's the biggest lesson you took from this?" I thought about it looking out at the ranch. Then I said quietly, "Gates are meant to keep people out, but real strength is in opening them, in letting people in." Her smile told me she understood. So now when neighbors stop by for eggs, or when kids crowd around Frank's workbench in the barn, or when a leaner hands out slices of pie at the market, I feel it. The truth Maxwell never understood. You can fence land, you can gate roads, but you can't cage a spirit that refuses to bend. And in the end, the fence meant to isolate me became the spark that brought us all together. Sometimes the little guy doesn't just survive. Sometimes he builds something bigger than the empire that tried to destroy him. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.